QuickBooks Self-Employed. So listen, if you own your own business, this is the best thing you can do for yourself because, you make money, you get 1099'd, and then it's the worst thing of all time because you're like, I don't know how much I owe to the government. I don't know how much I owe in taxes. It's terrible. This takes all the guesswork out of that. Go to tryselfemployed.com/words and you can get 50% off of this thing. It's incredible. I use it and a lot of my other friends use it. It is just do it, okay? 50% off. On with the show. Listen, there's something else I wanted to tell you. So this show works with an amazing company called The Midroll, and they help service advertisements for you, the listener, because, this thing, it costs money, and, I make hardly any money off this thing. I just want it to keep rolling. So that is what The Midroll helps me do. And in turn, I want to be able to show you awesome stuff that is relevant to you, your interests, all that stuff. So just take a 5-minute survey. Go to podsurvey.com/words. It'll take 5 minutes. You'll be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card, and it will tell you, us and the midroll so much about what it is you listen to, what it is you like, all that stuff. Because then we're able to take that information and make it better as far as the ads are concerned. So just go ahead and do that. podsurvey.com/words. Now, here's the real start of the show. Hello, everyone. I don't know why I decided to sing this intro. Welcome to 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I'm your host, Ray Harkins, and we are here with another beautiful episode this week. The guest is John Vanderslice from Tiny Telephone Studios. Also, a very prolific and important solo musician. He's done so much stuff over his long career within the independent music circuit that I had to speak to him. So, more on him in a few moments. Let's get some observations and pleasantries out of the way, and then we'll dive into the interview. So visit the show's website, 100wordspodcast.com, and you can interact with us on there or on Twitter, Facebook, however you'd like to find us. Because, I like it. I like when people email the show. I like when people tweet. It's nice. It provides some context for this show. Know that it's just, it's just me. It's me and Tom doing this. So there's no one else that's really messing around with this. So when you're speaking to the show's social networks, you're speaking to myself or Tom. So anyways, I saw Refused recently. They came through Southern California, played some shows, and holy shit, was it good. I saw them a few years ago when they played Coachella. They played a show a night or two before at the Glass House here in Pomona. And holy moly, was that good then? And they were even better now. I just love seeing bands that basically don't mess around. They take what they do very seriously, and they make sure that they put on the best show imaginable. And if you want to listen to Dennis on this particular show, hop back a couple, 100 episodes. I can't remember exactly. But he did a great interview on the show. So anyways, Refused, spectacular. See them if they're ever in your area. It will be worth it. And then I had something weird happen to me recently for my day job. So my day job is paying attention to pop culture and young people, what they're into, and obviously social media and social media celebrities are a thing. And it was weird because I had a meeting with a manager of a 15-year-old social media celebrity, and she came to the meeting as well. And, so I was interacting with the manager and kind of giving them a sort of business pitch, as it were. But then I forgot what it was like to be 15 years old and honestly not really be able to communicate your ideas well or appropriately for that matter. And it was just, I don't know, it just kind of brought me back to where it's just like, oh yeah, like sometimes it's really easy to, judge younger people and be like, oh, they're stupid and dumb. But then you're like, well, I was that too. And sometimes it's just a nice refocus of perspective where it's just like, oh yeah, like, that's because they're 15 years old and they don't know how to express themselves. And the stories that they tell may not lead anywhere. And, sometimes that happens. So it was just a funny experience for me to kind of be like, oh yes, that's that is where you were at when you're that age. And, I was the same way too. Not like I am any better at communicating at this point. I'm hopefully a little bit better than I was when I was 15, but still, it was just an interesting dichotomy. And I mean, that's something that we all experience as we get older and are still engaged with independent music. It's something that we'll have to, figure out. And that's why, like, when I bring younger people on this show, it's one of those things where I sometimes feel like I'm like, oh, well, I guess I have to do most of the lifting, and most of the questions and conversation points I'll obviously need to bring up, as opposed to rely on that person for conversation. So anyways, this person I did not need to lean on, because he provided so many amazing stories and so much great insight. John Vanderslice, like I said, a very prolific solo musician, as well as basically a indie rock guru when it comes to recording at his studio, Tiny Telephone Studios. Basically anybody involved in indie rock from the early 90s on has probably done something with John Vanderslice. I mean, Death Cab for Cutie. I'm not even going to do the list, because you can do 4 seconds of your own research and find out how important him and his studio was. So he has recently done a reissue of an old LP of his through the Native Sound. Friends of the show, great label. So they brought this idea to me and were like, hey, would you like to talk to John? And I was like, I personally don't have a huge investment in him or his music, but I know he's important. And holy crap, I loved this conversation. It was so good. And without further ado, here is my discussion with John, and so much great stuff. So much great stuff. So I'll talk to you after the interview is over, and I'll tie it up. It's a nice little bow on it.
For every broken masthead and scotch tape sail that passed us by, we hung on to orphan monkeys, and all we said and all that we did left me feeling like a little kid.
Usually I start to things off with just my own personal introduction to kind of, what you are and what you're doing, but I was always familiar with their name, just because, I've been playing in bands and been involved in the music industry for a long time, and, Tiny Telephone always popped up when bands that, for producers to record with and that sort of stuff. But you've always, just in kind of knowing your credits and everything like that, you've always struck me as a very hardworking person and very prolific, not only in your recording output, but then your own musical output. Simple question: Are you a workaholic? You seem like you kind of like to dig into that.
Yeah, it's weird. People tell me that I am, but I am the most lazy person in the universe. If I can not do anything, I'm all like, I have no interest in. I'm not driven. I see the workaholic behavior in other people. I think it's ridiculous. Like, I don't know what they're in a hurry for. So, I guess that. I'm a split personality in that way, but I definitely do. I guess I do get a lot of stuff done, but I don't know why I'm drawn to do it, because I'm not in any way, like, actually, most workaholics I know are like running from something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
like
absolutely.
Psychologically, you know what I mean? Like, there's something really sad. I get emails from bands, with their touring schedule, and I'm like, my gut feeling is just to say, like, guys, what's wrong with you? You know what I mean? Like, I don't look at it and think, wow, how great you're going on tour again for the 29th time. I think, wow, this is pathetic.
Right.
Like, this is sad,
Yeah.
You get the point at some point,
Totally. No, I see what you're talking about, because there's definitely a different mentality in regards to work when you're just using it as simply a distraction, even though it's obviously being productive. But so you don't view work as a distraction. You just view your work as kind of a trade or a craft, as it were.
Oh yeah, I'm old school, man. I'm like I could have been like a plumber or an electrician or something. I don't. I think that craft and work is sacred in its own right, and I'm very non-hierarchical. Like, I don't really care. Like, I actually really truly don't care if a band that comes to us is a micro band that you've never heard of and are not interested in, or if they're like super huge and famous and culturally credible, you know. Like it really actually doesn't mean anything to me at all.
Right. It doesn't hold any weight.
It actually might hold it might even have like an opposite pole where we have had really big bands in the studio, and there was sometimes like such a pain in the ass that I actually like it if there's some kind of sanity in there. So I usually actually lean the other way, or it's just like, sorry, my phone is like going crazy today, man.
It's okay.
This is the one thing I could do without, is my phone ever ringing. So that's definitely one vote for being lazy all day long, right? No one ever contacting you.
Sure.
Be the best. But yeah, I mean, I guess that I really have a very democratic thing somewhere inside of me, and I just, you know, I would have been totally happy, but just working anywhere. But as long as I'm like practicing a craft, like, I don't know, I always thought I'd be totally into like furniture making or something, you know?
Right. Well, I noticed in kind of looking at your you know, life trajectory, I'll back it up a little further, but like you had aspirations at one point to, you know, kind of be interested in teaching. Am I correct in that?
Oh, I could have been an absolutely very happy teacher. I mean, I think all teachers ultimately get disappointed with like the commitment level of the students. You know, I'm sure that would wear you down.
Right.
You know, like I think about trying to teach me, and I'm just like, oh boy, no thanks. You know.
No, totally. Me personally, coming from a family of teachers, like my wife is a teacher, my mother is a teacher, and you are completely correct. It's not your own, I guess, ideals and drive. It definitely just gets kind of squashed by, it's like, oh, dude, like, you know, I got 40 kids and like 38 of them care, but those 2 that don't just kill it for everybody.
Oh man. Oh yeah, I bet it would totally wear you down. So yeah, but I would absolutely. I mean, I'm drawn to it. Certainly, a lot of the studio is built upon teaching. I mean, I always think that bands should book time in a studio to learn about how to be a better band. I mean, I think that a good studio can actually. I've had fantastic experiences in the studio where it's actually made me a better thinker about music. You know, that it's like, sorry, I'm filling my bird feeder right now.
It's okay.
I have 2 bird feeders, and I have like 1 million birds that come into my backyard, so I'm like really obsessed with them.
Sure.
Really, really fun.
That's a very cute hobby.
Oh yeah, I'm totally committed. I have these bird feeders that like the base of it spins if something heavy gets on there. So like, for instance, if a squirrel gets on it, it'll kind of spin them off. But you could have like 9 birds on it, and it'll be fine.
That's funny.
So I mean, I probably have like 500 birds in my backyard in any given day. I mean, sometimes there's like 30 birds in my backyard at one time. It's amazing.
And it doesn't give you any sort of Alfred Hitchcock-esque flashbacks of the birds?
No, well, you know, it does. You know what does give me that is when my girlfriend and I were just actually up in Bodega Bay, and that will give you a flashback.
It does. Once you're like, oh wait, I recognize that school. I recognize that playground.
Oh yeah, and that shore, absolutely, and that phone booth, which is, I don't think it's still there, but these are pretty little adorable little birds.
Right. Yeah, there's no threat there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were born and raised in Gainesville, which you know, I mean, I've spent a decent amount of time there, going through on tours, and there's like a music festival that happens down there. It's such an interesting town because obviously it's like youthful based on the fact that it's a college town. But then there's that sort of, you know, a huge kind of suburban blight where it's like you could definitely have this, you know, whatever, for lack of a better term, just very typical existence. I know you only lived there.
Yeah.
You only lived there until you were about, what, 11 or 12?
Yeah, but Gainesville shaped me in many. We lived actually inside of Gainesville, in like, it wasn't like a planned community. We actually lived in like a, you know, very close to the school, and it was a very southern, like, not, it was a very like northern Florida existence for sure. Like when I go back there, it's very, very. It's a very, very particular feeling I have when I connect with my family and my relatives there. And I also spent time in Jacksonville and Swanee River. So that was really the context of my like growing up and discovering music and just kind of waking up, you know. It was I mean, the main thing for me was that had a lot of space, and it was very wild. I had almost no supervision as a kid, which was fantastic. I mean, it was just amazing, and it really changed the way that I kind of operated, and it gave me a lot of room to grow up on my own, and it made me a better person.
Yeah. Are you an only child, or do you have siblings?
I have a brother, but early divorce, single mom, and I definitely hung out with my brother some, but he was older. He wasn't really into hanging out with me, but I certainly had like a lot of friends, and we all had a lot of freedom, and there was nothing but space for us to run around, especially in Jacksonville, which we were connected to. The apartment complex we lived in was connected to like a vast, many square miles of like undeveloped, basically like sand dunes and just empty woods, and it was just unbelievable to have that.
Well, yeah, it's funny because a lot of people have an impression of a lot of people define Florida as, I mean, it's such a weird state because not only because of the weather, but obviously just the age makeup of Florida, because typically people retire there, and you don't get the sense of, besides like Miami, that it's a very youthful state. So it's funny that you had this kind of like wide open spaces, wilderness impression of it, because that's not what, I don't think people typically think of that.
Oh yeah, well that's definitely the split between like coastal, wealthy, transitional Florida, like the, retirement community vibe, and tourist Florida, and then also the northern part of the state, which is much more connected to Georgia, Alabama. I mean, you could, when I toured the South, or when I used to tour the South, I really felt that could be much more folded into like a, South Carolina, Georgia, that corridor there, and northern Florida are all very, very connected to me.
Mm-hmm, sure. And then you moved up to Maryland when you were, the Maryland area when you were, whatever, just starting to enter high school. Like you said, music got already kind of introduced to you in Florida. But where did your eyes start to open up to kind of the, for lack of a better term, the less mainstream, more independent side of things? Was that when you were in Maryland?
Oh yeah, it was when I was in Maryland. Basically, my mom, we grew up relatively poor, and unlike when people usually say that and they're lying, I am actually not lying. And when I was 11, my mom remarried a doctor, and I was basically like a rich kid. I mean, in the scheme of things, we went from lower middle class to upper middle class in a month. We moved up to a suburb of D.C. and called Potomac, Maryland, which is a very, very wealthy city. And we went to very, very good public schools. I got braces. I learned to ditch my Southern accent in about 5 minutes. And, with that kind of suburban like excess comes a lot of access to drugs. And so that's really what changed with me, was moving to Maryland and discovering like a kind of a drug subculture. And I hit that very early because I had an older brother. So, by the time I was in probably the middle of 7th grade, I was doing acid and cocaine.
Oh wow! Yeah, you were sampling the
I was young.
The soft stuff, as it were. It was directly to the harder drug. Excuse me, and pardon the interruption, but there's something I recently discovered and was brought to my attention that I wanted you to know about. So let's face it, most of us that are listening to podcasts and are into music nerd stuff, we rely on our friends to tell us what is cool, what's in style, what's happening from that perspective. So there's this awesome thing called Loot Crate. And so basically, you've heard of those delivery services that give you food and snacks and whatever else. This is basically a cooler version of all that. And when I say cool, I mean they deliver to you really, really awesome things from properties like Star Wars, The Walking Dead, Marvel Comics, Legend of Zelda. All of this stuff will come to your doorstep for like $0 a month. That's not true. It's $20 a month, but you get 6 to 8 items of cool stuff. And, I've seen it, and it's really high quality things. So, like t-shirts, other trinkets, figurines, all that sort of stuff. So basically, just it's rad. I really think that you'll enjoy it, and I want you to check it out. So go to lootcrate.com/words and enter the code WORDS, WORDS, and then you'll get $3 off your first box. And trust me, it's really, really fun because we're not just into music. We like comics, we like movies, all that other stuff. So yes, just dive in, lootcrate.com/words, and enter the code WORDS to receive $3 off your first box. It's awesome. Do it, and you'll enjoy it. On with the show. All right, so at the top of the show, I told you about something called QuickBooks. Now, I know finances and taxes are kind of the last thing you want to hear about when you're, relaxing, enjoying this beautiful interview. But trust me, it is something you need to be concerned about. Because at the end of the day, most of us are working for ourselves in some capacity, whether or not you have a full-time job and you do something on the side, like this podcast, for an example. I make a little money off this thing, and I need to put some of it aside each month because otherwise I'm going to be screwed at the end of the year, and I'm going to have no idea how much money I owe in taxes and all that stuff. But here's where the solution comes in. QuickBooks, self-employed, helps you figure that all out. It helps you keep track of your finances in relation to your personal side of things and the business side of things. Because that way, come tax time, you're just like, press a few buttons, boom, bam, done. That's it. It'll tell you how much you owe in taxes. It'll tell you how much you should put aside each month. It's amazing. And not only do I use it, but the record label that I help do some consulting work for, No Sleep Records, we use it as well. It's awesome. It's great. It's in the cloud. It's so easy to use. So visit QuickBooks Self-Employed, okay? Just go to this website, tryselfemployed.com/words, and you will get 50% off this thing. 50%, that's half off for something that will make your life so much better. I promise you. So visit tryselfemployed.com/words, 50% off. Your life will be better. Your finances will be in order. I mean, basically, you'll be a millionaire after you do this, okay? So just do it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd smoked weed before I was in junior high school, and I had a insatiable desire for drugs. I remember reading William Burroughs' Junkie when I was in 7th grade thinking, okay, I'm going to be a heroin addict. Like that's what I had in my head.
Right.
And I actually ended up becoming a very, very, very sane drug user. Unlike a lot of people that I grew up with, I backed away very quickly. I think maybe by the time I was 16, I was essentially straight edge without the politics, but straight edge meaning also that I had no friends because all my friends still did drugs. So that was a very rough moment in my life.
Yeah. Well, but it's interesting that you had that sort of, really, really hard experience. Because I do think, especially, in the context in which you were approaching the drug use, like at one point before, I'm 34 years old and, you're a bit older than me. So there's a generational difference. Like, once I started to enter, junior high, that was when the DARE program was a thing. And obviously drugs were less, for lack of a better term, sexy. So it's like, but there's especially the 60s beat poets and everybody else that existed in that scene, that was totally glamorized. And it was cool to do that. So I could see where you would look at that and be like, oh yeah, that seems cool. I'll try that out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But even they can throw every school program at you, but if you want to do drugs, and there's many human beings that are wired to do drugs, you're gonna glamorize them on your own.
It's true.
But I think that really the interesting thing with all this, the thing that, first off, there's a survival thing. If you're that, I was incredibly reckless for a couple of years, and there was just a point where you realize that you want to survive, and you're going to also watch a lot of people not survive. And I when I look at the wreckage of those days, it's totally fucking insane. But the reason why I brought that up, and I forgot why I brought it up initially, but it's really was that my whole entire connection to life was music via drugs. That's where everything changed. And so that's when I got interested in, you know, good music. I mean, I grew up in really a home that didn't play music, didn't have a stereo, didn't even listen to the radio, and here I was, you know, in someone's basement listening to, you know, the Zombies or Yes, you know, records.
Right.
And like and the drugs were very, very part of that. That was like the door into more complicated and more really ambitious music for me at that time. Later on, it didn't. The thing is, I would argue that stuff stays with you forever. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is that I still see music as being, you know, like kind of reflected through that that experience, even though I don't really do drugs anymore. And so I think that I mean, I always, I mean, I probably said this 2 days ago. I look at a band and I'm like, hey, more druggy, please. You know, like let's make it a little bit sexier. You know what I mean? And it doesn't really have anything to do with taking drugs. In fact, I've made records with people that are totally straight edge that are so weird. I mean, they make some of the weirdest music I've ever heard.
Right.
And so it doesn't really have anything to do with drugs, but it has to do with a connection to the unconscious and an automatic way of being creative and free, a freedom and a lack of I don't know, like
Inhibition in a way?
of kind of like, oh, I'm sorry?
I was just saying, like, maybe, you know, lack of like inhibition, like you're less
100% lack of inhibition, but also a lack of formality. You know, like Steve Jobs mentioned that taking acid helped him rewrite, you know, pathways in his brain and helped him really to like program, you know. And I've heard that from a lot of Silicon Valley people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, like getting rid of you have to shed musical history somehow, or you're going to make some boring ass music, man. And so that's, you know, that's the part of the value of that experience for me, and I just try to enforce that with bands.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's half of what I do, is try to make bands feel secure enough to make music that's original and that's weird.
Yeah, well, no, I think this was actually something I was going to ask a little bit later, but I think it's appropriate to bring up now in regards to all the recording experience I personally have had. Like, I've played in hardcore bands in the past, and I was the lead screamer, as it were. So recording vocals for me was always a real chore, just because, you know, it's such a sterile environment, and trying to mimic the you know, anger and ferocity that you're trying to get out. It's tough. But the thing that I've noticed in a good studio experience is obviously the vibes, like the vibes that you, the producer or engineer, are trying to create. And it sounds to me like, especially with what you're alluding to in the, you know, make it more druggy or whatever. So what sort of vibes do you try to, like, I guess, concentrate on in the studio? Like, do you kind of leave it very free for bands to, you know, experiment, but then obviously rein them in when it's necessary? Like, are vibes important to you, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, and well, I mean, there's a couple things I do. One is that I try to remind bands, like, they'll often say, like, the thing that everyone does. You know, they'll say, like, oh, let's put phaser on the drums, and I'll just be like, listen, man, every single band asks me for the same 5 stupid things. And like, you know, I mean, I'm like mellow when I say this, but I'm just like, I'm here to just tell you what everyone asks for, so you don't have to be, you know, so you don't lump yourself in with the rest of like humanity. You know what I mean? Like, you know, every band asks for some kind of rewind or fast forward sound when we're on the tape machine to be kind of like recorded onto their song. And like, you know, I think it's really important to have this kind of, you know, bullshit kind of meter, you know, next to you that says, it's not only been done before, but it's been done like every day in every studio, you know. And I think that that's very useful. The other thing that's useful is to actually encourage bands to be their most creative and their most bold self. I mean, if you listen to good records, interesting albums made right now, they're fearless, man. I mean, you listen to that new Kendrick Lamar record, it's like a fearless record. You listen to the new Freddie Gibbs record, Pinata with Mad Lib, it's fearless. I mean, these are people that really don't give a shit, man. Or the Death Grips, you know, like, they just don't care.
Right.
And I just think that most bands are incredibly conservative. they're unbelievably conservative and afraid. And that's the big problem that I see in music. It's never performance. I don't care about precision in playing. Not only do I don't care about it, I usually try to veer away from it. Because it's boring, and it's also, there's something amazing to allow the listener to correct performances and pitch, to bring them into the creative process. It's a very, very interesting trick. I mean, you're never going to allow something to really be that out. I mean, we've had both of us about the experience of listening to stuff that at first listen was the most out of tune or sloppily played record ever, and then the 10th time you hear it, it's perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really crazy. It happens all the time, and it's really, you begin to love that feeling, of like where you're drawn in. The listener is actually crucial to finishing the album, and it's not that it's just like outsider, look how goofy this is played, or how punk. It's not even that. It's just that you're better off with that first transmission of ideas onto tape than the 30th transmission of ideas to tape, because what listeners connect to is blood. They connect to like oxygen, in performance. And bands are very, very afraid of, they're really, really afraid of anything that's out of the ordinary, that's kind of like out of, really outside of the history of the music that they're familiar with. I mean, bands will sit on the couch and talk about how much they love, like, abstract electronica or completely deconstructed weird music, or the first Animal Collective record as being like, oh, that's really a jumping off point. And then they are terrified when the record light's on. It's really, so I've got to help them bridge that gap between what they want and what they're comfortable doing.
Yeah, no, I love the way you're talking about it, because it definitely, in the way you're describing it, it's obviously so much more of a psychological journey that you go through. Because yeah, you do see when bands first enter their first sort of professional recording experience in a studio, that they're like a deer in the headlights. They're terrified. They don't know what they're doing. And then hopefully, like you said, when they get finished with that experience, that they will be essentially a different band because of it. Not so much maybe sonically, but just like, oh, now I know how to do like. But
hopefully sonically too, because live music is a snooze, man. I mean, seriously, like live bands are a snooze. I mean, it's like you better be balls out the best live band if that's your recorded output is going to be a literal representation of what you do on stage, then you better be like drawn blood live. But most bands, and I mean like a very, very high percentage of bands, have to use the studio. It'd be like the difference between like a play filmed and like actually making a movie, where you're utilizing editing and cinematography and soundtrack in a way where it's not just a literal representation of a script. And so, look at the recorded output of The Clash. I mean, that's a very interesting way to utilize, you compare Sandinista to the first Clash record, in combat rock. And this is a band that's really using the studio in a way that's like absolutely bolstering their ideas and their songwriting. It's very, very interesting.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's very reflective of obviously their career and how important it was to so many people, because they touched so many musical genres and brought so many people into their journey that followed them along. So yeah, you're right. As you started to kind of like, backing it up, kind of like getting into high school and kind of, forming your own identity, as it were, what kind of kid did you find yourself being? Were you, really drawn to the arts at the time, or were you, super into sports? Like, what sort of archetype did you fill within that context?
I was a straight up loser, man, big time.
Total
not a cool loser in retrospect. Like I was programming, early Commodore computers. I was just a straight up loser, just total burnout loser. Not good at sports, not good at talking to girls, not good at anything. I mean, I turned it around, but it wasn't like, there's nothing interesting about my early my early self, I don't think. I mean, I probably had a lot going on upstairs, but I definitely, I was like my neighbor's dog is being really loud. Sorry.
That's okay. Were you, so you were
But
just you were just kind of aimless?
yeah, I was just like, until I basically straightened up, I was like a flop, I mean, I was, I graduated high school with a D average, I mean, I barely got into college, and I had no girlfriends. I was just like a loser, man, which is fine. I mean, at least I got it out of my system, I mean,
Yeah.
Hey, some people are losers when they're 27, you know what I mean? Like,
Totally.
Like at least I got it out of my system and like moved on, and I learned some tough lessons. I mean, I learned. I'm going to go inside because this dog is, first of all, it's freezing.
It's okay.
But I learned like really, really tough lessons, and I never forgot them, man. And I lost control of my life through drugs, and I never allowed that to happen again. And so, really, by the time I was like in college, I graduated early because I just had to escape high school. I got very lucky. I had a principal that just recognized that if I didn't get out of high school, I would not ever get out of high school. So he like pushed me to take 12th grade English in the summer, and then he like got me into the state, local state university, which isn't a good school. You didn't really need transcripts to get into, but he got me out of high school. And then once I was in college, it was amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was like totally reborn as a person. It was great.
Sure. So basically, you felt like you were really able to kind of develop develop into the person that you are via college, as opposed to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, reading movies, like like a different set of friends, and like no bro culture. Like it was much better.
Right. And so then what prompted, because I mean, once you graduated and kind of like we spoke about earlier, you kind of had your eye on potentially teaching. What prompted the obviously the cross-continent move to San Francisco? Because that's where you ended up. That's where you ended up initially, right? After the East Coast?
Yeah, I did. Well, I moved to LA, and then there was a girl that I liked here, so I moved up here to be with her, and then that didn't work out. Unfortunately, she actually like wouldn't let me date her. So it was meaning like a near miss. It just didn't happen, But I stayed because the city is very interesting. It's still a very interesting city to live in, and I think that it's connected to a coastal beauty that's, if you are immune to it, then you are a corpse. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it became very, very important to be connected to Northern California, and also the food and the just the openness of the culture here. And it's very, very mixed. It's an incredibly diverse area. The Bay Area in general is very, very diverse.
Absolutely.
It's very progressive politically. I just fell in love with it. I mean, I wouldn't have stayed here because it's so expensive. I wouldn't have stayed here, but I rented a warehouse and it became Tiny Telephone. And so I was really I was rooted here. And for many years I was touring so much that it was totally fine to be here and to be traveling. And I wasn't whatever restless kind of feeling I had. It was kind of solved by touring. And then, I basically stopped touring last year, and I'm very happy here,
Yeah, no, that's really rad. I definitely appreciate your thoughts, like you were mentioned at the very beginning, when bands are, on the perpetual touring cycle off of supporting their new record and then tour for 10 months and then go back in the studio. And obviously you were a part of that for a long time. And then now you have the perspective where you can look at that. So I guess in your own head, when did you start to butt up against that idea of just like, dude, I don't want to like get in that proverbial saddle again and like do that whole touring regimen? Because obviously I imagine you were still kind of touring when that thought process started to click in your head. When did it become more clear that you wanted to step away and obviously focus on life at home, as it were?
Well, touring to me has always been sacred. I mean, I think that the relationship, if you have a relationship with performing live and you're able to do it all the time, that's a very, very sacred connection that you have. Like I think about like I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of hours that I've been on stage playing. It's just incredible, man. It's like I was so lucky. When I was younger, that's all I wanted to do was to be able to tour. That's the only thing I could think of. And so that was like a really, really big deal for me. It's not that I got it out of my system. It's that I had like a near-death experience as every band has. I'm actually, most bands have had multiple near-death experiences. Some are closer than others. Some have flipped their van. Some have gotten into highway wrecks. Some have just like had their own deaths like foreshadowed, on the highway. And that's what happened to me. And I just something clicked in my head. I was like, I'm done. That's fine. I don't want to die here, man. I'm in love. I have 2 beautiful cats. I got a lot of friends. There's a lot of stuff to do in life, and I'm not going to die on the 80 today. It's like that. And so, like, I don't look back with 1 second of regret to I was fully committed to touring. I mean, I played over 1,000 shows. I mean, I was totally there, and I love it, but more in theory, just like, it's just something that I did, all the time in one phase in my life, and there's a big world out there. And so I decided to stop. There's a couple other reasons too. One was that if you don't stop touring completely, you'll just, I get asked I still have a booking agent. I get asked to go on tours. If I didn't just turn the tap off, I would just keep doing it. You know what I mean? Like I would just keep going.
Right.
And I just decided to really focus on production. Like that was like and you can't focus on production if you're going in and out of town all the time. It just doesn't work that way. And then once I decided to focus on production, I decided to open a new studio in Oakland. And so that became like a different kind of challenge to me.
Right. Yeah. No, I could easily see, especially from the production side of things, because usually, stereotypically speaking, people that are performing music or in bands, they don't have something else at home that is like, I guess, as compelling, like, or like a job or something that they can kind of pour themselves into. So it's like, I'm sure there were many years where you're on the road where you're just like, I kind of wish I could record a little bit more, but that time is not there because I'm gone so much.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a major cock block for your life to be on tour, for
sure. Right. And so then, as you started to, perform, I mean, like, playing bands and stuff, was you as a solo artist, like, was that kind of the, I guess, inception of your like playing shows and stuff like that, or was obviously the band life first? Like, where was your kind of your chops, I guess, created in regards to performing live?
Well, definitely being, my first band, MK Ultra, that's where I learned how to play with people and how to be creative in a room full of people. And bands are problematic in general. They're difficult democracies to kind of make work, but they also teach you a lot. And I learned an awful lot. And it was really a good experience for me to then, when I started putting out solo records in 2000, then I really started, having like smaller groups of people that I was collaborating with, sometimes over, 5 or 6 years, and then I would have natural turnover. Some people would get into other bands, some people would move away, but it was really organic process of playing with different people and hiring people for tours. Sometimes I would want to do a tour that was a trio, so you'd have to have like very different players on that tour than when it's a quintet, or when it's a duo. And so I really think that helped me kind of grow too, to play with a bunch of people after I got out of the band, a bunch of different people. They're usually better musicians than you are. That's the cool thing about when you're solo. You're almost always playing with people who are more skilled than you are, and it's pretty exciting, actually.
Sure. Yeah, you definitely can vibe off one another in ways that you maybe not originally anticipated, because they're just like, oh wow, they're either a better player than I am in this respect, so I gotta make sure I'm keeping up with them, or vice versa.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So would you define kind of the way that you approach recording and stuff like that, and the rapport that you build with the bands, like, is that reflective of your personality, or do you kind of find yourself adopting different traits for the purposes of recording bands, or do you kind of are you consistent from that aspect?
Do you mean when I'm producing bands, or when I'm making my own records?
Yeah, when you're producing bands.
I try to, yeah. I mean, I try to be, as far as like what I've learned and what's natural to me. I try to bring a style, and I try to bring like all the knowledge that I have to bands, like 100%. In other words, I'm very unfiltered when I'm recording bands. I don't just sit back and place microphones and like document a performance. That to me is like, first off, it's really boring, and second off, it's kind of not fair to the bands, because they're like, you want like the more curated experience, and that's kind of why you're there in the room. And also, any experience can be elevated. It can. I mean, even if you're recording like the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, that experience can still be elevated by very small tweaks and very simple direction. Given, I mean, look at the Keith O. Johnson recordings that he does of symphonic stuff. It's very, very unusual. But yeah, I mean, I'm really, really transparent with bands, and I do it with like, I have no emotion when I give like kind of hard, brutal truths to bands with a smile. You know what I mean? Like I don't shame bands, and it's a celebratory thing for me to be in a studio. Like I'm thrilled to be there, and I'm super happy to be there with bands, but I definitely try to be very, very honest with them about the quality of what they're doing and how they can make it better. And often you can be in a band with in studio with a band, and they can make something very special based on just a little bit of like pushing. You know what I mean? It's not like a huge thing.
Sure.
You switch out, a drum set here, you redefine the terms of like a song and singing and tempo and harmony just slightly. You just kind of like skew it a little bit. You add distortion where there was like sterility. You add freedom where there was like fear, and band does 95% of the work, but it's really helpful when you're being framed by something, and I think that's where the studio experience can be very interesting. Listen, studios can suck royally, man. I had some of the worst experiences of my life in a recording studio, and like most studios aren't very good, and most engineers are terrible. So we're really aware of that, like that historical baggage. We're often repairing relationships that bands have had between bad studios
right.
and their own creative life. I mean, you've probably been in studios where it's been miserable. I mean, it's just like, how often does that happen? It happens all the time. And it happened to me 3 times in a row before I started a studio. And that's crazy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's not encouraging, because all you want to do is just be like, so this is what this experience is going to be like kind of for the rest of me being creative with music. It's like, that sounds awful.
Yeah, and it is. And that's why bands are smart most of the time to stay home. Like, we'll always encourage bands to stay home. Like, sometimes that's the best move that a band can do, But when a studio experience is good, it can help a career band, really grow and change. And that's what you need if you want to be a career band. You have to have some range and some depth to your output. And, most bands have a very, very miserable discography. I mean, it's a intellectually sloppy and untrue version of their better selves, and like, that's not good. The best artists out there, actually, their recorded output is just better than they are. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you want. You want the record to be the best thing you ever put together in that year,
Yeah.
And it's often the exact opposite. I mean, I see tons of bands where I'm like, holy shit, they're so good live, and I've never, ever heard this before.
Well,
I don't see this in their 5 records that they've made,
Well, yeah, it's because a lot of the times you get you obviously get so bogged down in the business, and it's a matter of simply recording something in order to have that new material that you need to make money off of, i.e. touring and obviously all the other, accessories that happen. So it's like, yeah, you're very right in that fact where it's like you just get kind of caught up in that process, and it's just like, well, as long as it's good enough, then it's cool, right?
Yeah. Well, and also it's like there is, the terror of the band too, like getting too bogged down budget-wise in a record. I mean, I get it. I get some of that stuff,
Yeah, definitely. And so you've had obviously a wide variety of experiences from a business perspective within the industry, from not only obviously managing your own studio, but then, as a recording artist, being signed to multiple different labels. Would you define yourself as like, I guess, good at business? Because there takes a lot of effort from people in bands in order to either wrap their heads around that, or is that something you're still kind of evolving into?
Well, I would say, I mean, I was lucky, man. I was pushed into getting a degree in econ. I think that really helped, and I think that I have like Dutch blood in me, and this is like a ridiculous thing to say, but I at least was deluded into thinking that this kind of like mercantile worldliness that like the Dutch have in spades was like, I got like 1% of it because I was just naturally very, very good at running the business. I loved it. I mean, to me, art is like, whatever, man, like until the rubber meets the road, until it's like actually, oh, this was a profitable tour. Like, who cares? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, to me, going on tour and losing money is like retarded. You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, the whole idea with art is that you have to make it sustainable. You can keep doing it. I was only interested in career artists. That's all. I wasn't interested in like vanity projects. I wanted to be part of something and do something on my own that was sustainable. It was working class. I never made shit tons of money, but I made money, and I was very, very proud, and I paid my musicians well. And the same with the studio. Like, the studio is profitable. It makes money. I don't think that things are good when they lose money. I actually really don't. I hate to say it, but as a capitalist, like, there is like a great incentive when. Now, listen, if you're just a trust funder, then all bets are off, you know what I mean? And you can just drain your parents' accounts down to nothing. But if you're a normal working class dude, it has to be sustainable, or else you can't keep doing it, and you will just, you'll like have a nervous breakdown, you know what I mean? You'll go bankrupt, and you'll owe a lot of money, and you'll alienate the people that love you. You know what I mean? So like, yeah. I was very, very proud that I was involved in something and that I encouraged bands to be sustainable. And that often means being very, very humble about what you do and how you do it. And I mean, like the way that bands toured, the personnel. I mean, man, it's amazing how many times I would talk to a band and be like, why are you touring with 5 people?
Right.
Like, why?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why are you touring with like an Ampeg refrigerator amplifier? Like, how dumb are you? You know what I mean? Like cabinet and like the old 9-10, 10-inch speaker configuration. I seriously think that they're like the dumbest bands I've ever seen in my life. Like, they're actually paying to just haul that thing around the country, and it's like for no reason. It actually sounds worse than like a good small cabinet, Right. So like there's a million things like that. Like, what kind of hotels do you stay in? Like, how do you behave on the road? I don't know. I think that this stuff has to be sustainable and has to be profitable, unless you're a rich kid. You know what I mean? And if you're a rich kid, the Darwinian side of it might be that you don't have to be very good when you're a rich kid because there's nothing at stake.
Right. Well, I think it's what you're talking about. To me, it's just a very practical approach. Like, there doesn't need to be, because I think so many people, I don't include you in this because you obviously have a very good business sense as well as an artistic sense about you. But I think there's there's sometimes a strong delineation in the sand between people who are artists and businessmen, and never the two shall collide. And when they do, sometimes very, ungenuine art is created because they're trying to make money. But it's like, no, I agree with you completely, where it's like, it's just a practical approach. Like, you can be unreasonable to a point where it's just like, okay, we're going to take a risk. This tour may lose money or whatever, but there's all these reasons why it's positive. But it's like, you shouldn't be staring down the barrel of 10 years of doing the same exact thing, and you're still in that spot where it's like, oh man, this next tour is going to be profitable.
Oh yeah, well, any band that has made 10 records and that tours the world makes money. You know what I mean? It's like it's not like, so it's almost like you have to do it. You know what I mean? It's like it's almost like you actually have to reach that point, regardless of how you feel about it. You know what I mean? Like, you can have mixed feelings. Hey, shit, I have mixed feelings about, like, living in the U.S. I mean, you're going to have mixed feelings about everything. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I have mixed feelings about paying the U.S. federal government. I don't know. I pay like $12,000-$13,000 a year in taxes. I mean, I despise the U.S. government from a foreign policy standpoint. It's like, to me, it's absolutely despicable. I mean, Chomsky called the U.S. The number one greatest world terrorist the other day. And I was like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, we're going to have mixed feelings about everything. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I wish, that there was like a social safety net here to rival Norway and Germany, but it's not going to happen. And I wish that we didn't spend, 20 to 30 cents every tax dollar on like surveillance society and on military toys for a bunch of rejects, but that's not going to happen.
Right.
And so you have to operate within a system, within reason. And the system that we have for touring and for making art is that if you're not sustainable and if you're not profitable, then good luck. It's not going to happen. And so you can't afford to even have mixed feelings about it, because you're not going to be able to actually make a responsibly recorded album. And by that, you might go to Electrical and spend 3 days with Albini and make like a Jesus Lizard record. I don't know what you're going to do, but it's got to be badass. You know what I mean? Like, it's got to be something that's worthy of of spending 10 years of your life, 15 years of your life. And so, you can be as confused. I mean, I personally think that's like a dumb thing. I mean, and I hear it all the time, and I tell bands all the time that it's like, it's kind of a dumb thing to get, worried that there's like a split between creativity and making money. I mean, you're a human being living in America in 2015. Right. Good luck,
right.
Thinking that this is about, you're not like the village shaman, you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
Like, first off, no one needs your art, man. Like, there's too much art right now. No one needs a record,
totally. There's plenty of it out there. Just get in line.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. You should go to Haiti and like do volunteer work, and just be quiet.
Yeah. We need more doctors. We don't need more dudes in bands.
Yes. We need more doctors providing free services, but maybe not more doctors.
Right. No, absolutely. It's definitely, it's like you said, it's just it's a practical approach, and I agree. It just needs to be.
But what you're saying, I do hear all the time. But I will say this: that the internet, like most things, the internet is making it better. There are the youngest generation that we see, which is really like 18 to 22 in the studio, which we see quite a bit of these. High school bands, post-high school bands that are kick-ass, man. They're not stupid people. I mean, I would say that they're the least dumb people we ever see in the studio.
Right.
I mean, kind of the most dumb people that we see are like 50 years old. Actually, they're filled with the dumbest kind of nonsense. And the internet's made people smarter. It just has.
Yeah, there's more access points for people to obviously become educated, and even if they don't have the proper context for that education, it's still, like you said, at least they're connected and they're trying, as opposed to, like you said, the 50-year-old man or woman who's just like, I don't know what's Twitter.
So dumb.
So yeah, you're done. The last thing I want to hit on before I let you go, because I found it so incredibly interesting, how you view your relationship with hip hop, because you in multiple interviews you've referenced the passion that you have for that genre of music, and you view it as for lack of a better term, and correct me if I'm wrong, where it's like you kind of look at it as a vacation, where it's like you wouldn't be typically interested in maybe like recording a hip hop artist, because you have such a strong passion for that particular music. I don't know. I felt like there was so many interesting thoughts within the context of that, because I do feel like a lot of people like look at music as this very linear and binary thing where it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to follow this road, I'm going to pick up these records, and that's kind of what I'm going to do. But all of a sudden your head gets cracked open by something else, and then you're just like, oh wow, here's this whole other world. So yeah, I don't know. I found it so interesting.
There's a couple of reasons actually why I wouldn't want to record hip hop. One, I actually don't feel I'd be very good at it. I mean, I really don't. Like, I think it takes a different skill set, and I think I would be good at introducing a certain type of dirtiness and distortion and noisiness into stuff I was working on, but I don't think in general I'd be very good at it. There's different rules and there's different benchmarks for, Bomb Squad, Dre stuff, Neptune stuff, the J Live. I mean, there's just different. It's a different art form, in many ways. And just like I wouldn't be good at recording classical music. I mean, so that's one. And two, yeah, I mean, I do like to keep these like kind of walls up. Like, I mean, I'm a huge, like, for instance, okay, so I'm a huge like classical fanatic, like big time. So my friend does press for the San Francisco Symphony, and she got me in like a couple weeks ago, and we went into the back entrance where all the musicians are tuning up, and there's a couple of musicians there, and there was like this kind of guy like staring at me. He was like a horn player, and so I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And he didn't say anything back to me. He just like kind of like glowered at me, And I was like, "Fuck this guy, man!" You know what I mean? Like, and then I'm watching the I don't know, it was like Bruckner 9 or something, and I'm watching it, and he's like playing the horn. I'm like, "Yeah, there's that fucking asshole that didn't say hi to me," And like, I mean, I actually don't really care, and I'm being a little bit funny about it, but there is that weird thing where it kind of affected me. Do you know what I mean? Like, my love of this, in a vacuum, this stuff is so pure, but it gets dirty when you get involved in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, when I go to see a band, like an indie rock band, it's like my head it's just like, oh, that front of the house guy isn't very good. Oh man, why are they playing that reissue Les Paul? Why didn't they just get like an early 70s Les Paul? They're the same price. I mean, all of a sudden it's like so inside, and it's so claustrophobic because I know so much about, I have so many personal connections to that like art form that it almost makes it feel like work, and when I'm watching an NBA game or I'm watching like, the Bourdain Trio or something, it's like, it's completely removed from my workspace and my work headspace. And that is very valuable, man. We need to get out of our head. So hip hop has that for me for sure. I also think that hip hop is just, this is a huge term. There's like tens of thousands of people in this tent. So it's kind of difficult to be definite about what we're talking about. But I would say that I'm much more likely to be surprised, to be shocked, and be incredibly laugh out loud entertained by listening to hip hop and listening to some like somber, dude sing a song about his, with no humor. Like, first off, I mean, there's so much humor in hip hop, like where people see these kind of like boasting, like asshole taunts. I see humor. Do you know what I mean? I think it's like incredibly funny. You know what I mean? And like, and I don't think that, like when Earl Sweatshirt's talking about using hollow point bullets, that he's actually really talking about using hollow point bullets. You know what I mean? I think that there's a certain level of like wordplay and invention in hip hop you're never ever gonna see anywhere else. Outside of like poetry.
I totally agree. I think it's something that's so important, and I think it's something that is, especially like, I'm reflecting more on myself than what you're talking about, where it's like sometimes I tend to, look at the world through, a very specific lens, because obviously that's my experience. But then it's like, when I hear, whatever Chance the Rapper's last record, it just like, it opens up my world to, a larger.
That's a good record.
Yeah, it's great. And it's a larger ecosystem. Yeah. And then not only does it do that, but then like I go, I saw him perform when he came through on tour, and honestly, like if I were to just like plug my ears and just view the way that the crowd reacted to him, I was like, this looks like a punk or a hardcore show. And it's like there's very little difference besides maybe the demographic makeup, but it was like it still resonated with the same energy, and it just kind of aligned, that train of thought in my head to where it's just like, oh, like this is incredible, and it never could have come from an independent music scene at like that I am used to. Like you said, everything, all those feelings that you have, it's just it's incredible to watch that. I'm just glad. I really am glad that you're waving that flag, because I think it's just important, and I think a lot of people do paint hip hop with this really broad brush of, like you said, everything that's bombastic and theatrical about it. It's like, well, there's a lot going on underneath the hood there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
No, that's spectacular. Well, John, I really, really appreciate you hanging out with me on the phone. It's been fun for me to kind of get to know you and dig into different areas of your life. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ray. I appreciate the great questions too. It's really fun. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too, man. So there you go. There's Mr. Vanderslice and all of his wisdom. I loved how candid he was about his drug use and his love for hip hop. It's just nice to be able to hear a different perspective rather than just like, oh yeah, I like this style of music and that's kind of it. So anyways, thank you to John, and thank you to Julio for hooking this up with native sound. And Tom Richfield, our producer, he recently just got back from tour, so hopefully he is still okay. And if he's not, I will somberly spread the word that he broke his hand stage diving at a show that he was playing. So, but no, he's home safe, so we're all glad about that. And visit the show's website, 100wordspodcast.com. Email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. And until next week, be safe, everybody.